Okay, well, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Virginia Braun from the University of Auckland. Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you, Sean. And I'll get myself clipped up. Tēnā koutou, katoa. It's wonderful to be here. So, key career advice in my PhD and early career days, which I successfully ignored, was having a career roadmap. I say successfully ignored, but although it made no sense to me and I had the privilege of a permanent position, I felt a sense of failure for not taking this strategic approach. And I'm glad I did, however, because my career has not been what I hoped and dreamed of. And today I'm going to tell a brief reflexive story about knowledge and knowledge production, weaving in unexpected challenges and disruptions, contingencies, and the complexity of all that. Rodin's sculpture, The Thinker, encapsulates an idea somewhat of the past, thinking as a white, male activity, knowledge is produced in solitary ways through internal reflection. But it has persistent tendrils, for those of us who have seen The Last of Us, a bit like the fungi that kills the human population. Excited by knowledge itself and by the possibility of ideas and thinking, I came into academia to understand, to disentangle, to produce knowledge and hopefully change the world. The thinker's tentacles held me. My research was largely a personal engagement and process, even as many others have been key in my developing thinking. In contrast to the dominant quantitative orientation of mainstream psychology, qualitative methods grabbed me. They offered a way into the rich texture of lives and meanings, nuance and complexity and contradiction. And I was excited by language and the contestation of truths and norms, and with this, I non-strategically embraced the edges. With qualitative research now relatively common and recognised as having value, it's hard to remember back to when it was marginalised and regularly questioned and dismissed as not real knowledge and just fluffy made-up stuff. I was also attracted to peripheral knowledges, to researching uncomfortable topics related to gendered bodies and sex and sexuality. My research interrogated the construction of truth and possibility through language, representation and meaning, from everyday popular discourse to formalised language, scientific research, media, advertising materials, and more. After my PhD, I researched female genital cosmetic surgery. I was able to focus on the real-time emergence, or rather production, of an entirely new phenomenon. I was able to show that the long-standing socio-cultural constructions of genital inadequacy or disgustingness meshed together with self-empowerment discourse to sell a marketed as simple, easy and perfect solution to genital distress for cisgender women, but that had long-standing ideas built into it. I wanted and hoped and dreamed of making a difference. Could I save the vulva from becoming part of a standard arsenal of surgical interventions to aesthetically improve women's bodies? I tried to make a difference through media engagement. The most impactful was a long, searing article in Cosmopolitan, US. It sadly didn't deal a fatal wound, but it got the surgeon's attention. I also got involved with a feminist activist campaign, The New View, which organised against the medicalisation of sexuality. We tackled it in a range of ways, scholarly, activist and creative. It was good to be doing, but did it change anything? Perhaps, but such surgeries are now everywhere and normalised. The critical work I do speaks against, tries to interrupt and disrupt, tries to make visible invisible norms. But it's doomed often to failure because norms are, by their very nature, tenacious, insistent, and bloody hard to shift. I imagined I would continue to do such small-scale projects on gendered bodies and sex and sexuality as socio-culturally produced phenomena, picking away at, trying to unpick the densely threaded realities we exist within, exploring the ways in which lives are constrained or could be different. I had a community of critical feminist scholars, passionate, supportive, and operating at the margins of our disciplines and contexts. I was happy. I'd never wanted to be mainstream. Academia is a glorious and yet tough gig. Alongside doing research we're passionate about, the workloads are cruel, the hours are long, and they can be relentless. The next part of my story explores how health and well-being and illness and disability are just as important career shapers as any roadmap. I'm currently on long-term sick leave for burnout. I'm unofficially here. I have to say I'm in a personal capacity because I'm not supposed to be here. This is the second burnout of my career. In 2005, I was on sabbatical and I found I couldn't work. For those who know will understand that's kind of like a double punch in the gut. The sabbatical is precious research time, but now it comes with deliverables. There I was, full of hopes and dreams and obligations and pressures, and yet all I could do was stare blankly at my computer, interspersed with crying. I was based in Bristol with a colleague and friend from my PhD days, Victoria Clark. As I remember it, Victoria rescued my sabbatical from dismal failure by suggesting we finally write a methodological paper that we'd been discussing for years. We were trained within the beating heart of critical qualitative methods. During our PhDs, we'd been required to think about knowledge itself, the ways in which we can know. We not only had to do excellent research, we had to understand why and how what we claimed could be claimed. Everything was questioned, our heads buzzed and hurt. It turned us into what we later described as brats, at conferences being shocked and dismissive of what we saw around us as methodological and theoretical sloppiness. We weren't publicly mean or cruel, but we did not recognise the privilege of what we were gifted in our PhD program, a deep training in methodological thinking. We pulled together a paper on thematic analysis. Somewhere. There. This wasn't the first thing written on thematic analysis, but we attempted to systematise an approach, locate it theoretically and conceptually for qualitative psychology, and provide a guide for a robust, rigorous and methodologically defensible practice. Job done, back to our own research, or so we thought. Somehow we hit a nerve. Others found our approach to methodological writing accessible and removed the anxiety produced for many by a theory-driven approach. Instead of being quietly judgmental brats at conferences, could we use this inadvertent skill to help others? I experienced a dual magnetic attracting and repelling around writing methodologically. I am excited and passionate about it. My collaborative writing with Victoria and a few others, including Nikki Hayfield and Gareth Terry, brings lots of pleasure and satisfaction. Yet it seems to slot into the domain of teaching rather than research or scholarship. And as a child of the 70s and 80s, I am haunted by slogans such as this. I grapple with the question of whether, in choosing a path as a methodological scholar, I have actually failed as a scholar. While I embraced methodological writing, I experienced loss, anxiety, and that sense of failure. I don't know where this would have taken me if health hadn't got in the way. I spent a third sabbatical finishing up our first and what would become a very popular qualitative textbook, but returned home unknowingly infected with what would eventually be diagnosed as Lyme disease. I was one of the unlucky ones who end up with a long-term, disabling and little understood condition. Alongside fatigue, I struggled with cognitive challenges, brain fog, memory, concentration, a brain that no longer works as it had. It was quite an existential challenge when your brain is integral to your work and your work is integral to your identity. For me, methodological writing requires a different kind of brain activity than empirical work. It still worked, but it's hard to simply embrace something that reflects a loss. There's a kind of conflict and a tension around those. Victoria and I continue to write methodologically and have promoted an orientation to qualitative research and writing that is both about quality and trying to democratise access to information, recognising that the training people get is often limited or none. Our work has a popularity and recognition we never anticipated or aimed for. My PhD was on the vagina. Victoria researched lesbian and gay parenting, not the topics you choose to win friends and influence people. I hope our profile means that we can have sway in methodological debates and discussions and can help people to produce knowledge that has solid and robust foundations, that is thoughtful and meaningful and reflexive. To me, Rodin's image remains both relevant and irrelevant. Being thoughtful about research is essential, yet so hard in a world of commodified academia. But in contrast to a decontextualised man on pedestal, we understand knowledge is always situated, located, produced in context, by people who bring themselves, their values, their relationships, their communities, their everything to the work they do. Reflexivity is a necessary companion to qualitative research, to all research, because it allows for situated and partial knowledges rather than singular truth. And this speaks to what are for some contentious issues, including challenges to the validity and place of knowledges not from Western scholarly traditions, including mātauranga Māori. As a Pākehā scholar, it's not my place to speak to that, except in ways of support and solidarity. Knowledge is not singular. Knowledge is not produced or developed or uncovered or discovered, you can choose your verb, in a single way. There's just not just one thing to know about the world, or one way to know it. My unlikely position as a scholar who produced knowledge with contested and dismissed approaches on the margins of a discipline, but whose work around how to produce knowledge has become widely popular, used in almost every discipline imaginable, gives me a particular perspective on those who hold tightly onto ideas of right and wrong ways to produce knowledge. Power is not separate from questions of knowledge, nor how we go about producing it. So just to finish up, one of the central aspects of reflexivity is about demystifying. And today, instead of talking about my research and what I do, I have tried to disrupt the veneer of success, to highlight contingency and context, and the often messy realities that swirl behind success. This should not be heard as a woe is me tale, nor a story of triumph despite adversity. It's messier than that. I may not have been able to stop the design of vagina or transform our normative constructions, but it is and has been and is a wonderful gift to be able to offer something to the world that is transformative for people in their own research, to be a producer of knowledge about knowledge production. That does make a difference. Thank you.
Kia ora, and thank you for that very open and honest discussion of your career to date.
Thank you.
We do have some time for questions, and just a reminder, if you do need to shift rooms, you're welcome to do so in the next couple of minutes. But yeah, I would like to open up the floor for any questions. Perhaps I'll start. And I mean, the idea of a roadmap to career, versus the sort of the spontaneous discovery and the changing paths. I mean, looking back now, how satisfying would it have felt to have actually followed the roadmap? I mean, you sort of had one perhaps in mind, but.
I think it's a really good question, which I probably haven't reflected on enough. But I think it would be. I think what I want to sort of emphasize is that sense of holding on to things lightly, because I think if I'd had a very clear sense of where I wanted to be, and some colleagues would have had, like, in 5 years I'm going to have achieved this, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to make these kind of strategic directions, I think the challenges that I faced, the personal ones, would have been much harder to grapple with. They were enough of a kind of psychologically complex thing in and of themselves. Whereas I think, we have all sorts of imaginings about scholars and careers and those sorts of things, which often reflect our very normative ideas of society and ableism and all these kinds of things. And I think a lot of that sort of planning and strategizing reflects those things. So I think for me it would have been a lot harder to face those challenges with that if I'd had a sense of added failure that would have been built by not meeting my roadmap to success.
Yeah. Well, that's good advice. Kaitha.
So do you advise your students, especially your graduate students, to develop a roadmap to success?
I think my graduate students can probably answer that one better than I can. I tend to sort of say, what do you want? So not a roadmap really so much as a sense of what's your purpose and what's your intent, and then how can we think about getting you to that place. Maybe I should advise them on roadmaps. I don't know.
All right. Well, let's thank Professor Braun again.